Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, high political drama in London. The media reach new lows covering the story.
Don't keep saying what I think.
Alistair.
This is live on television. No, don't keep telling me what I think.
BP pollutes the Gulf of Mexico and makes a mess of the public relations side of things.
This wasn't our accident.
Embedded war reporters, the stories they get and the ones they miss.
For the first time, U.S. and NATO officials admit that a February raid in Afghanistan went very, very wrong.
And bouncing all over town with Damian Walters. Politics has been called the art of the possible, journalism the first rough draft of history. And this past week in Britain, in the aftermath of an historic election, the British news media did not enjoy their finest hour. A story that ended with Conservative David Cameron in 10 Downing Street through a coalition deal with Liberal Democrat Nick Clegg began with a series of negotiations that triggered a firefight in the British press. Right-wing newspapers, fearing the Conservatives would get locked out of power, ratcheted up the anti-left rhetoric, and although there are fewer of them, left-wing papers reported the story their way. There were also suggestions made on the air that Rupert Murdoch's 24-hour news channel, Sky News, could not hide a pro-conservative bias. Our starting point this week is Westminster, in the heart of London, and a first draft of history that was both rough and tumble.
These are hacks, these are members of the public, these are people who are hungry for information.
Journalists are reporting this with extraordinary excitement because it is a fascinating and gripping political story.
Yeah, there were almost gasps from the journalists who were standing here in Downing Street.
This is just an amazing period that no political journalist working today will ever forget.
A new Prime Minister at the head of a new coalition government.
In this election, journalistic ethics and impartiality has gone out of the window.
I'm fed up with you telling me what I think.
It's an amazing sort of media storm. You are in some ways witnessing arguably the death throes of the election print media.
The election results were less than 24 hours old when Britain's largest newspaper came out with this on its front page.
You had the ludicrous Sun headline, which said squatter in number 10, man aged 59, is occupying number 10 and preventing the rightful owner David Cameron from entering. This is absurd. The British Constitution guaranteed Gordon Brown the right to stay in number 10 under a hung parliament and work out what to do. He wasn't there illegitimately, but that's what the paper was trying to convey.
Quite a lot of them have a right-wing agenda that absolutely wants the Conservative Party in. It's something of a new territory for them. British media, especially the more partisan newspapers, just aren't used to this idea of negotiation and complexity. They like it kept simple.
And I do think that's unfortunate. I do think that there is it may be dull to say, well, this is the Constitution, he kind of has to stay there. But I do think there's actually a virtue in truth and in reporting the facts.
Clearly the result of the election means that politicians have a duty to speak to each other.
It's been interesting how it seems to be that the political parties are coping rather much better in a rather more rational and calm way than the news media and especially those newspapers.
The Sun is a conservative tabloid, not renowned for highbrow journalism. The Daily Telegraph is also conservative, but takes itself much more seriously. And when Labour's Gordon Brown was trying to build his own coalition, the paper's headline accused the sitting Prime Minister of mounting a coup. The Telegraph is a broadsheet, one of what the British call the quality papers.
One of the great things about national newspapers in the UK is that they are so sort of partisan, because the broadcasters are banned by law from being partisan and from showing a view. So it's the great kind of point of difference that newspapers have from the broadcasters in the UK. So that's why they're so bellicose and opinionated, because they can be.
They take a point of view, and this is not a conspiracy, it's not a secret. They're very clear and open about the fact that they support not just political viewpoints, but they'll go out and back political parties.
Which wouldn't really be an issue if this was a fair fight. However, in Britain, where a clear majority of voters supported parties of the centre-left, an even clearer majority of newspapers have a right-wing agenda.
We have very few papers that back the government, very few papers that are left of centre or left wing. And in this election campaign, we've seen a real campaign against the government, against the Labour Party from the right-wing press, from in particular the Murdoch-owned press, like The Sun, like the News of the World, like The Times, like the Sunday Times.
Rupert Murdoch also owns Sky News, one of two 24-hour TV news channels based in the UK. Murdoch has said that he wishes he could turn Sky into a British Fox News, a conservative news outlet that he owns in the US. But British broadcast law forbids that, and Sky is therefore much more balanced than Fox. However, in the post-election media melee, Sky did attract criticism, largely over news anchor Kay Burley.
The breaking news this hour.
Burley interviewed the organizer of a rally called to encourage Liberal Democrats not to forego their election promises in exchange for a coalition deal.
They voted with hope, with hope.
Is that what they voted for or not? Did they vote for that or not?
Burley took issue with the point of the protest.
In voting for a hung parliament,
so you marching down past Westminster this afternoon will make no difference whatsoever?
Repeatedly.
What people voted for was they voted for change.
Have they not? Did they vote for that or not?
And the network received hundreds of complaints.
That's what they're negotiating at the moment,
well,
so why do you need to protest?
That's what we really hope.
They're already doing it. You might as well go home and watch it on Sky News.
On election night, Sky was accused by Alistair Campbell, media advisor to Gordon Brown, of an anti-Brown bias.
The media in this campaign has been very, very biased against Gordon Brown.
You started this. You're the one of accusing the television media of being biased against you.
Adam, you're great at giving it, you can't take it.
But that was nothing compared to what happened a few days later when Campbell went at it again with Sky's political editor, the normally unflappable Adam Bolton.
Adam, you're obviously upset that David Cameron's not Prime Minister.
I'm not upset.
You are. You probably are.
Don't keep casting aspersions.
Adam, calm down.
I am commenting. Don't keep saying what I think.
This is live on television.
No, don't keep telling me what I think. This is what you do.
They almost came to blows, and where Campbell effectively accused Bolton of being a pro-Cameron apparatchik. I think what we saw there was not deliberate bias on the part of the Sky man. What we saw was actually a broadcaster who was rather tired, having worked 24-hour days in the election campaign, and rising to the bait that was set for him by a very experienced Labour spin doctor Alistair Campbell.
Moments like the Bolton-Campbell clash serve as reminders that for all the flashy, provocative newspaper headlines, this was a campaign that from the first televised debate on was dominated by electronic media.
We're all watching 24-hour news and we're all listening to the radio and checking online and checking Twitter. People are ignoring the press more and more because it's yesterday's news and we want to know what's happening right now. And maybe that's why the newspapers are becoming so sort of shrill and angry and spinning so hard in an attempt to get noticed and have an influence.
Spinning and spinning the story until Britain's right-wing newspapers got their happy ending. Here's how our Global Village voices see the media's performance on the British election story.
During the current election crises, we've been observing the mainstream media in their coverage of the issues. Unfortunately, I think that this coverage can often be very partisan in nature and really doesn't represent the full range of the debate. New media offers an open platform where people from all areas of society and all communities and backgrounds are able to contribute and discuss the things that are going on.
I am surprised every day by the tone of the media. Well, maybe not surprised because it's been like this for quite some time. It sickens me to the very core. There are some forms of media, nothing like this. The free press is what they call it. In those kind of media, you do get unbiased coverage. So maybe I'm not really surprised by the tone of this current coverage of this current event because it's the same as it always is.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. BP, the oil giant responsible for that huge spill in the Gulf of Mexico, is trying to fight its way back from what has been a public relations disaster. The company's CEO, Tony Hayward, blundered in one of his first interviews with the U.S. network ABC.
This wasn't our accident. This was a drilling rig operated by another company. It was their people, their systems, their processes.
But he quickly corrected himself, saying the company was, in fact, responsible. BP also tried to get local fishermen to sign waivers saying that they would not sue the company or talk to the media. BP then admitted that that, too, was a mistake. The company is now trying to use Facebook, Twitter, and its own site to repair the PR damage. But check out the site, bp.com. First of all, what the news media calls the BP oil spill is referred to as the Gulf of Mexico spill. And check out the pictures. Shots of the command center, shoreline defense systems, community outreach. All that's missing is the oil in the water. The company also put out roughly 11 minutes worth of video on the site, but only 12 seconds of that showed the environmental damage. A Tamil journalist at the center of one of the most controversial legal cases in Sri Lanka has been pardoned by the government. We reported last year on the case of J.S. Tissanayagam, the editor of the Northeastern Monthly magazine. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail in March of 2009 for, quote, supporting terrorism, unquote. The case attracted the attention of Washington and the European Union, both of which talked about the worsening conditions for journalists in Sri Lanka. Tissanayagam denied all of the charges against him, saying he was opposed to violence. He was bailed in January, granted an appeal hearing, and then pardoned before that appeal was heard. U.S. President Barack Obama, considered by many to owe his election to the internet, sounds like he's not that smitten with new media these days. Obama, whose campaign for the White House harnessed tools on the web to raise record amounts of money and to attract voters to his message, used a recent speech to students to lament some of the informational shortcomings of new media.
Information becomes a distraction, a diversion, a form of entertainment, rather than a tool of empowerment.
Obama's dealing with the flip side of the blogosphere these days. Political opponents use the web to perpetuate theories like the one that alleges Obama was not born in the U.S. and is therefore not qualified to be president. Some of the craziest claims, he said, can quickly gain traction on the net. And he said that the phenomenon is putting new pressures on American democracy. You could call it a conversion on the road to Caracas. Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez has made a complete about-face on Twitter. Back in January, Chavez was ridiculing the social networking site, even calling it a form of terrorism. That's because some of his political enemies were using Twitter to criticize him. Now Chavez has signed up, and within 10 days, his account had attracted more than 250,000 followers, making his the most popular Twitter account in Venezuela. The president has reportedly hired around 200 people just to manage the account. The question is, can Hugo Chavez adapt to the new medium? Can the politician, who's been known to ramble on his televised talk show for as long as 13 hours at a time, get the message out in 140 characters or fewer? We're back after the break with a piece on embedded war reporters, getting access but missing out on the bigger picture.